The universe of Warhammer 40K is defined by endless conflict, where each and every faction fights tooth and claw to claim ultimate victory and seize the galaxy for themselves. Now, unfortunately for them, this franchise is one where no individual faction can ever truly win everything. If they did, the whole thing would be over, and James' workshop would be out of a job, and he's not going to let that happen anytime soon. But what if the impossible actually did happen? What if one of the major factions actually managed to win? And I'm not talking about just winning some major battle here or there. I mean, they won the Warhammer 40K. All of their enemies were wiped out, and they finally managed to plant themselves as the galaxy's supreme overlords. Well, in this video, we're going to be breaking down what the galaxy would look like if each faction managed to emerge victorious. And just so you're aware, this video is going to be getting into some wildly speculative territory, so make sure you strap on your tinfoil hats before you dive in and take everything with a grain of salt. We're going to be talking about what would happen if the Necrons won, and how that would look radically different depending upon who's in charge, either the Silent King or Imhotep the Stormlord. And spoiler warning, only one of their paths ends in a happy ending. We're going to be talking about what life would be like for mankind as part of the Tau Empire, and what would happen if chaos managed to merge the warp and the physical universe. We're even going to talk about how mankind's ultimate victory would lead the species to ascend into something both unrecognizable and also kind of tragic. We're going to be talking about all that and a whole lot more in this video, but before we dive headfirst into the grimdark, if you couldn't tell, I'm a huge fan of classic fantasy, and it's probably one of the main reasons why I find 40K so endearing. I love seeing all of these fantasy species reimagined in the grimdark future, whether that be dwarves, demons, elves, beastmen, or even the undead. Now recently I've been playing this awesome game that's got all of them in spades, and you're going to want to hear me out, as the developers have partnered with me on this video to provide all of you with some amazing in-game gifts for free. This game has it all: amazing champions, intense PvE and PvP content, tactical upgrade systems, AAA graphics, and an endless amount of content. That's right, I'm talking about Raid Shadow Legends. The big news this month is that Raid Shadow Legends is partnering with Universal Products and Experiences and Mattel to bring both He-Man and Skeletor to the game as legendary champions from November 25th until December 25th. Everybody can unlock Skeletor for free, as well as a ton of other amazing rewards simply by logging into Raid for 14 days between November 25th and January 8th. You'll unlock Skeletor on day 7 with extra bonus rewards for the next 7 days. Players who manage to complete the Champion Pass will also get the legendary champion He-Man. If you haven't started playing Raid yet, then what are you waiting for? Click on my link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses that you can only get using my link. When you sign up using my link, you will immediately get a huge starter pack with an epic champion Tagoar from the Ork faction. And after reaching level 15, you'll get another starter pack that includes the epic Grizzled Jarl from the Dwarves faction. But wait, that's not all. After downloading using my link, you can use promo code Monkey King to get the legendary champion Sun Wukong for free. But you gotta be fast, as that promo code is only gonna be good until January 7th. Big thanks to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video, and a special thanks to Universal Studios licensing. Now back to the grimdark. Even though the Tyranids are often depicted in the stories as being horrifyingly alien and completely unknowable, when it comes to what they would do if they won, we know exactly what would happen without a shadow of a doubt. They would eat everything. Every planet, every plant, every animal, every man, woman, and child. All would be boiled down into biomass and used to make even more Tyranids. And we even know what would happen after this because of how the Tyranids showed up in our galaxy in the first place, something that was covered in the epilogue of the novel Pharaohs. Once the galaxy is left as a cold graveyard of dead worlds, and there's nothing left for them to consume, the Tyranid winter will begin. The hive mind will issue a command across all of its hive fleets to retreat back into the outer dark and enter a period of hibernation. All of the hive fleets are going to head in different directions, and once they exit from the galactic rim, they'll shut down everything but the most vital of life-preserving functions in order to make their gathered biomass last for as long as possible. Then, while they sleep, their long-range augury systems will begin to scan distant galaxies for the telltale markers of prey. It'll likely be tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of years before a new target is located. But eventually, the Tyranid sensory organs will pick up small bursts of light, indicative of intelligent life in a distant galaxy. Once this is discovered, they will slowly begin to exit out of their dormant state and head in that direction. Once they arrive, they will unleash the same alien terror that they brought to the Milky Way, and the whole process will repeat again. Now, as horrible as a Tyranid victory would be for the Milky Way, there is at least some good news. In the novel Belisarius Cawl, The Great Work, it was revealed to us that although the Tyranids leave practically nothing behind, and even scrub a planet of water, minerals, and natural resources, they are for the most part surface feeders and don't dig too deeply into the planet's crust before moving on, meaning that on many of these planets, microbial life will still exist. So give or take a couple of billion years, and the galaxy will be good as new, with all kinds of new species and intelligent life forms to inhabit it. That is, of course, until somebody blows something else up like the Pharaohs again, and they start drifting back in our direction. Now, if it's the Necrons that end up coming out on top and achieve total victory, then one of two things is going to occur, and it's based on who ends up being in charge of them. Either Zarek the Silent King or Imhotep the Stormlord, the two most likely candidates in such a scenario. In either case, after the Necrons win, their dynasties are going to begin to spread out and start seizing up more territory for themselves. After the last of their enemy strongholds have been destroyed, and there's nothing left to challenge their rule, a period of infighting amongst the dynasties is likely to occur. Necrons are a proud and arrogant race, many of their pharaons believing themselves superior to their peers. Without a supreme ruler to bind them, endless civil war is surely to follow. And that's where those two previously mentioned individuals come in. Many people believe that the Silent King is the supreme ruler of the Necrons, and although that was true during the days of the War in Heaven 60 million years ago, a lot has changed since he went into self-imposed exile and only recently returned to the Milky Way. In the time that he's been gone, others have risen in his place, and Imhotep, pharaoh of the Sawtek dynasty, views the Silent King as a relic from a bygone era that has no right to continue existing. For his part, the Sawtek dynasty is easily the largest and most powerful, largely due to the fact that they use their strength to conquer not only their enemies, but also other Necron dynasties. The pharaohs of these dynasties are given a choice: bend a knee and assimilate into the Sawtek, or refuse and be executed, only for your dynasty to then be absorbed anyways. Now don't get me wrong, the Silent King is incredibly powerful and wields a considerable amount of influence amongst the Necrons, but he isn't exactly popular with everybody. He was the one that made the deal with the Catan to initiate biotransference in the first place. Many Necrons view everything that has happened to them as entirely his fault. And while he was away in exile feeling sad about what he had done, Imhotep was actually there. He's a ruthless and brutal son of a but at least he's been here with his people. Unfortunately, we still haven't seen both of these dudes go head-to-head in any of the novels, so until Games Workshop gets around to developing their feud a bit more and give us a bit more insight into this, I'm gonna say it's about a 50-50 shot on who ends up being in charge after the Necrons win. But from humanity's perspective, that ultimately doesn't really matter. It's gonna be a bad time either way. But at least with the Silent King, there will be something of a happy ending, at least for the Necrons. With Imhotep, however, not so much. And this comes down to a difference in philosophy. The Silent King wants to reverse the process of biotransference, likely by using a host species that the Necrons can download their consciousness into. By doing this, they could pick up where they left off 60 million years ago, using their deathless bodies to secure the galaxy for themselves and then discarding them once they are in control. Because living hosts would be required for this, and a flesh and blood species would have need for plants, animals, and things like that in order to sustain themselves, the galaxy would likely remain much as it is now, and be completely full of life. Sentient species that oppose the Necrons' rule would ultimately be subjugated or maybe even exterminated, but primitive species would be likely ignored. However, by contrast, Imhotep goes in the complete opposite direction. He views their mechanical immortal bodies as an improvement over organics in every conceivable way. He does not view biotransference as a curse. Far from it. He believes it is what led them to their ascendancy. Because of this, he would have no wish to reverse the process. Under his rule, the galaxy would become a kingdom of the dead. All life, down to the microbial level, would be eradicated without mercy. The Milky Way would be cold and dark, every world dominated by towering ziggurats and mechanical horrors beyond comprehension. But what comes after all this? Well, I have a particularly dark theory that I would like to put forward, and it concerns the Flare virus. Now, in early Warhammer lore, the thing that turned the Necrons into flayed ones was viewed as a semi-spiritual data virus that came from one of the Catan known as the Flare. It would infect the Necrons and cause them to go insane. They would start hungering for flesh and would even drape the skin of their victims around their metallic frames in hopes of emulating what they once were. The only problem was that when it came to eating all of that flesh, they didn't actually have mouths to eat it with. They were akin to hungry ghosts, an entity lost to madness that just fell deeper and deeper into a well of insanity with every passing century of their immortal life. In more recent lore, i.e. the Twice Dead King series, it was suggested that the Flare virus is not a virus at all. It is the true inherent fate of all Necrons, that they will all eventually turn into one of these things. Whether it's something that just inevitably happens to each and every Necron, or it spreads like a plague after the Necron total victory, ultimately, it doesn't really matter. Since at this point all organics would have been destroyed, the Silent King's dream of reversing biotransference is now utterly and completely dead. Since the Necrons still have no way of repopulating, they'll all eventually become a flayed one. It may take tens of thousands of years for this to occur, but make no mistake, if Imhotep becomes the supreme overlord of not only the Necrons, but the entire galaxy, one day he will watch as their dynasties crumble and the Milky Way becomes inhabited by hungry ghosts, crazed entities desperate to consume the flesh of organic creatures that all died out thousands of years ago, leading to an endless age of madness and insanity. Can you imagine what this would look like to somebody visiting from another galaxy? Like, they touch down on a planet and they're clearly seeing signs of ancient civilizations, but they must have all died out a long time ago. They're like, well, sucks for them, but hey, free real estate for us. This place just needs a new coat of paint and it could be a brand new home for us. And then an entire galaxy of flayed ones, literal mountains of them, start ripping portals across space and time and descending upon them. And they're like, Jesus Christ! So yeah, total Necron victory isn't going to be good for humans, no matter who ends up as their supreme leader, but at least with the Silent King, is somebody will get a happy ending. Now, it's certainly not going to be fun for anybody else, but if the Orks manage to achieve total victory, they're going to have a great time. The galaxy is going to become one big chaotic and violent playground, dominated by warring orc clans. Now at first, they're just going to have fun hunting down the last remnants of power from every other major faction, either exterminating them outright or taking them as slaves. However, after they've run out of enemies to fight, the orcs are going to do what they always do when boredom takes hold. They're going to turn on each other and start warring amongst themselves. The galaxy's natural ecosystem after this will completely collapse, and will be replaced by orc biomes. As the clans wage war across the galaxy, each and every planet will become absolutely saturated in orc spores. They will spread like a plague until every surface is teeming with orcoid life, be they the birthing pods of new boys, squigs, Gretchen, or feral orcs. All technology in the galaxy will be scavenged and orcified, the mech boys creating ever more bizarre and unstable contraptions, some going as far as turning entire star systems into massive malfunctioning engines of war. Now, I know this part is going to come completely out of left field, and I recognize that, but just hear me out. As demonstrated in the War of the Beast, the more orcs gather together, the smarter they collectively become. With the orc population now completely out of control, I think we may enter a period where the orcs start to revert back to their previous form. That is to say, they'll revert back to the Krorks, the 30-foot tall super intelligent life forms from back during the days of the War in Heaven. After this point, they may even reach a point somehow beyond that, as the galaxy becomes completely dominated by Krorks. If such a thing takes place, I think it's reasonable to believe that these super Krorks would be able to develop technology that allows them to travel to distant galaxies, thus entering a dark new era for the universe, a never-ending war that spreads out to all of reality. It's my belief, however, that due to the inherent need for conflict within the orc species, it's unlikely that they would all join forces and head to a new galaxy together. Likely, they would each go off in different directions, much like what would happen with the Tyranids. Hundreds of thousands of galaxies would suddenly have orcs entering into them. And by the time they got there, they would have spent a considerable amount of time away from the combined Wa, thus leading to the superintelligence from before slowly reverting back to the orcs we know today. In conclusion, if the orcs win, they'll end up doing the same thing they've always done, but in a new place and a new time. Honestly, it would be hilarious if this is actually something that already happened, and Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar are actually sequels to Warhammer 40K. One of the first things that you learn when you start reading about Warhammer is that there are no good guys in this setting. The second thing that you learn is that that's not really true. The Tau are arguably pretty nice and cool dudes. The third thing that you learn is that that's also not true. The Ethereals are up to some shady shit, and the greater good gives peace in exchange for freedom. All that being said, the Tau rising to power and wiping everybody else out is probably the best case scenario for the Milky Way galaxy, at least if we're talking in terms of total faction victory. They're a faction that, shockingly, actually values peaceful relationships and diplomacy with other Xenos species, an extreme rarity in the grimdark future where everybody hates each other. Their philosophy of the greater good preaches a lot of things, but primarily, it's that every action one takes should do the most good for the most people. Concepts like the self, individualism, personal greed, etc., are all massive taboos under this philosophy. If the Tau were able to take over the galaxy, they would spread this message to every intelligent species. They would end up uniting the Milky Way under their banners, and instead of war, would prioritize harmony, efficiency, and technological advancement. Unfortunately, some species are inherently too dangerous to be allowed to exist, so the Orks and the Tyranids would be eradicated without mercy. Necrons, the Eldar, and humanity would be folded into the Tau Empire, but all of their powerful technology would be confiscated or dismantled. The same scenario is likely for many of the newly inducted species, but we'll focus on the human perspective just to keep things simple. The Imperium would be completely dismantled. Its bureaucracy and religious institutions would be incompatible with the ideals of the Tau Empire. Now that being said, for the humans that would join them, portions of their culture and religious practices would be allowed to continue to exist, as the Tau do believe in respecting the ancestral traditions of their allies. That being said, elements that their new overlords deem problematic, such as the former Imperial Creed's whole "suffer not the alien to live" thing, would be meticulously censored. Many Imperial citizens would see becoming part of the Tau Empire as a good thing and would happily comply, whereas others would attempt to rebel. Troublesome individuals like this would be sent to re-education camps and be fed a never-ending barrage of greater good propaganda until they could be brought back into compliance. Regardless of what is or isn't allowed, over the millennia, human culture would begin to erode and be forgotten. It may take an incredibly long time for this to happen, but eventually humanity would fully assimilate, and the Imperium would become nothing but a distant memory. Now, all of the new species being folded in would be forced into the Tau's rigid social structure. This would entail the suppression of individuality and the stifling of personal freedom. Autonomy and tradition would be sacrificed in the name of homogenization. As I mentioned before, this is an element that would lead to dissatisfaction and potential rebellions, which in turn will cause the Tau Empire to bring down the hammer, making an example out of all those who refuse to accept the greater good. In many ways, humanity would end up trading the leash of one master for another, bound into servitude no longer by the Imperial war machine, but the greater good's promise of peace and progress via assimilation. I'm mostly focusing on the negatives here, but all things considered, I think the vast majority of Warhammer fans would agree that if they were to suddenly be isekai'd into the 40K universe, they would pray they ended up on a Tau world rather than in the hive cities of the Imperium. Like I said before, however, it's not all sunshine and rainbows under the Tau's banners. A lot would be sacrificed, but by comparison, it's probably an overall better bet. Imperial citizens still may not have a lot of freedom, but at least they'll be safe, and their quality of life will be marginally better. That is, of course, until the Ethereals recognize that humanity is actually the most dangerous species of all, and keeping them alive is continuing to influence the warp and empower chaos. At that point, all of humanity will likely be killed. But hey, it was fun while it lasted, for the greater good and all that. For mankind, any faction achieving total victory would be catastrophic. In many respects, that includes the Imperium itself, but we'll get into that a bit later in the video. However, one faction stands apart from the rest as a truly worst-case scenario, and that would be if the forces of chaos emerge triumphant in the grimdark future. Such an event would have profound consequences for the Milky Way and all of reality. Chaos is traditionally represented by the 4 chaos gods: Khorne, the god of bloodshed and murder; Tzeentch, god of sorcery, lies, and treachery; Nurgle, the god of life, death, plagues, and disease; and Slaanesh, the dark prince of excess. If left with none to stand against them, the galaxy would be overwhelmed by rage, bloodlust, ambition, decay, despair, and indulgence. Order would completely collapse. The kingdoms of man and the Xenos empires would crumble and descend into anarchy. The entire galaxy would come to look exactly like the Eye of Terror, as the fabric of reality was torn apart and the warp and real space melded together into an eternal hellish existence. With chaos ascending to power, the God Emperor of mankind would be destroyed or corrupted, an event that would shatter the Imperium and leave the million worlds of humanity isolated or consumed by rampaging warp storms. With no god to guide them, the faithful of humanity would be eradicated. All others would turn to the worship of the ruinous powers simply to survive. Species like the Tau, Tyranids, and Necrons, who under normal circumstances have little to no impact on the warp, and thus are rarely if ever influenced by chaos, would be unable to adapt to this new nightmare reality and would be wiped out. With the Eldari, a couple of different things could possibly happen. The webway would be destroyed under tides of demons, the Laughing God suffering the same fate as the Emperor. The Dark Eldar, having evolved to no longer be a psychic species like their cousins, would likely go the way of other less warp-touched species, devoured wholesale by Slaanesh. In her gluttony, it is likely she would consume the souls of all of the other Eldari as well, but this would take some time. In the species' last few centuries of life, however, the remaining Eldari would become fully corrupted by chaos, and now existing in a universe flooded with warp energy where reality bends to the individual's will, these few surviving corrupted Eldar would see their abilities increase to ludicrous proportions, turning them into powerful warlords, the equivalent of demon princes, or even greater demons. In time, however, they too would end up becoming consumed by She Who Thirsts. This would end up bringing about the prophesied creation of Ynid, the Eldar god of death, though at this point it would be too little too late. Ynid would not be capable of standing against the empowered Chaos gods and would likely be wiped out without much effort. And the Orks? I'm just gonna be honest with you, I'm pretty confident they wouldn't be too bothered by all the changes. Sure, they would certainly notice that something was different considering the whole galaxy was on fire, but meh, when life gives you lemons and all that. They would either become the puppets of Khorne, unable to continue worshipping Gork and Mork as Khorne's influence increased 100-fold, or, and fair warning, I'm gonna go full tinfoil hat mode here. Considering that the Orks would without a doubt thrive during the Chaos End Times, Gork and Mork themselves may ascend to become the 5th and 6th Chaos Gods, due to the Orks' population ballooning out of control and the entire collection of them beginning to be warped by the mutating energies of the Immaterium. It's grossly oversimplifying things, but chaos by its very nature cannot exist without conflict. Thus, as a faction, it denies conventional definitions of ultimate victory. In turn, what we consider a chaos victory is nothing more than an evolution of the great game. A second edition, an expansion, hell even a sequel if you want to throw some game terms into the mix. In this new reality, Khorne's bloodlust, Tzeentch's scheming, Nurgle's decay, Slaanesh's indulgence, and whatever the hell Chaos Gork and Mork decide to get up to, would leave no room for resistance or recovery. The now 6 great powers would continue to wage never-ending war amongst themselves, but now on a grander scale than anything seen before. Reality would unravel into a horrific era of perpetual torment, madness, and suffering, with no hope of redemption. Now, if the Eldar managed to achieve total victory, it not only would see the restoration of their ancient empire, but it would also bring about the unification of each different branch of Eldar society. The Craftworlders, the Exodite colonies, the Harlequin troops, the Corsairs, even the denizens of the Dark City of Camorra would all maintain a prominent role within this restored kingdom. As the Eldar are a dying race and don't really have the numbers to achieve total victory the old-fashioned way, their victory would likely come about through the creation of Ynid, via gathering the 5 Crone Swords, thus overriding the clause that says the only way the nascent god could be birthed is through the death of the entire species. as is their purpose, Ynid would then set about destroying Slaanesh first, thus ending the soul drain that plagues the Eldar race. This is all we really are told about the prophecy surrounding Ynid's birth, but as has been demonstrated many times in the past, when a demon kills another demon, they can either absorb their soul, thus gaining all of their power and wisdom, or bind them into an incredibly powerful weapon. Although this isn't something that specifically stated could happen with a Chaos God, since we're in tinfoil hat territory, I don't see why the rules would be any different. So you've got a god who's powerful enough to kill another god, and that god was at least strong enough to hold their own against the other 3 Chaos Gods and the Emperor at the same time. These 2 entities fusing together would make them ludicrously powerful. I believe at this point, Ynid wouldn't stop here, and would go about murdering the other Chaos Gods as well, in order of strength according to the lore. First Nurgle, then Tzeentch, and then finally Khorne. And somewhere in between, they would likely kill the God Emperor as well. After this, I believe Ynid would aid the Eldar in resurrecting the rest of the Eldar pantheon that had previously been killed by Slaanesh, with the God of Death taking their rightful place atop the hierarchy. During all of this, the Eldar would have risen to heights never before seen in terms of individual power. Their Farseers would be able to conjure warp storms of raw death energy generated by Ynid that would make the ruin storm created by the Wordbearers during the Horus Heresy look like a stiff summer's breeze by comparison. The rest of their enemies would quickly be wiped out, and the Eldar would go about reshaping the galaxy in their image. Through superior Wraithbone technology, psychic mastery, and unparalleled artistry, they would usher in a utopia of cultural and technological marvels. So sounds pretty good if you've got pointy ears, but for everybody else, not so much. Any that were not killed outright by the Eldari would face stark consequences for their actions against the Empire in the past. Members of the lesser races would be subjugated or destroyed. Institutions like the Imperium or the Tau Empire would be dismantled brick by brick, while species like the Tyranids and the Orks would be completely eradicated. If any of the major players would be allowed to continue on, it would likely be the Tau, as they have worked closely with the Eldar many times in the past. And although the relationship isn't perfect, it's a lot better than every other faction. Like I mentioned before, their empire would be dismantled and their most powerful technology compensated, but I don't foresee the Eldar condemning them to extinction. The Necrons, however, would go down swinging to the last. There is no conceivable way they would stand by and do nothing while their most ancient of enemies ascended to power once more. One by one, their tomb worlds would detonate, and their legions would be reduced to ash, until the final Pharaon was forced to bear witness to his once great dynasty, reduced to a kingdom of dust. But after this is all said and done, what will end up happening to the galaxy? Well, during the height of their power before, the Eldar had a practice where they would capture worlds noted for having pristine natural beauty. They would then not allow any other species to colonize on them, and would basically maintain them as planet-sized nature preserves. These worlds were called the Maiden Worlds, and the goal was that they would eventually become inhabited by Eldar. I think we would see the Maiden Worlds go from numbering in their thousands to their billions, many of them finally seeing their first Eldar colonies established on their soil, while the rest ripened, waiting to be harvested. The Eldar are a long-lived species that seldom gives birth, so even after this point, their numbers would be considerably low, even millions of years after reclaiming the galaxy. So all of these Maiden Worlds would spend a considerable amount of time going uninhabited, and in an ironic twist, after an Eldar total victory, the galaxy would return to its natural, beautiful state. There just would be a lot fewer people left to appreciate it. Now, when it comes to the Imperium's total victory, it could potentially go in a lot of different ways. Some people believe that the God Emperor will return and lead humanity into the promised Golden Age. Others believe that he will fully ascend to godhood and become a being of the Imperium, where he will there watch over and protect us from chaos. Some believe that the warp will be entirely destroyed along with the ruinous powers, mankind instead now relying on the recently conquered webway for interstellar travel. I understand the mindset behind each of these ideas, and in small portions I think they're all correct, but I do take a few issues with them. First, even if the Imperium does away with warp travel and starts using the webway exclusively, the Immaterium can never truly be destroyed. It and our universe are not two separate places, they are two sides of the same coin. One cannot exist without the other. And so long as humanity exists, so too will negative emotions, which have a direct impact on the Sea of Souls. Meaning that even if mankind and the Emperor manage to kill all of the forces of chaos and destroy each and every one of the chaos gods, it's very likely such threats will re-emerge sometime later in the future. And it might happen sooner than later, because without humanity's legion of enemies to fight against, the human population is going to very quickly start to balloon out of control, somehow even worse than it already is. Now ultimately, we don't know what the Emperor's true intentions are, so for this analogy, I'm mostly going to take him off the table and assume that in his wisdom, he would choose to remain as a spiritual being rather than return to the physical universe. He can be a lot more help to mankind in the Imperium anyways. So it would seem then that the warp will mostly be under control and humanity will have no more wars to fight. But not so fast. That's only against aliens, mutants, and heretics. In reality, the vast majority of the Imperium's problems come from within the Imperium itself, and it's not even really close. Shifting alliances, ballooning populations, a continuous lack of resources, technological stagnation, and inter-faction conflict will still be pretty commonplace. The Imperium is not a unified whole. It is a techno-feudal theocracy comprised of thousands if not millions of different factions. Be they different sects of the Imperial Creed, different planets, different sectors, different branches of the Administratum, etc., etc. Even today, the Imperium is riven with competing factions that all war against each other for resources and influence, sometimes openly and sometimes fought in the shadows in wars of espionage and sabotage. All of mankind's problems are not going to disappear. They're going to get exponentially worse as its population begins to skyrocket. From my perspective, in order for true peace to be achieved within the Imperium, in order for our species to enter its new golden age, it will have to ascend into something unrecognizable, something cold, logical, and mechanical. It is for this reason that I personally believe the most likely scenario to occur after an Imperial victory will in time reveal itself to be a victory for the machine, a victory for the Adeptus Mechanicus. So what would this actually look like then? Well, after the last of mankind's foes are slain and the Imperium has declared total and complete victory, they will begin their largest expansion effort yet, spreading out to every corner of the galaxy wherein they establish new colonies on every world capable of supporting life, including those previously held by their foes. The dogmatic creeds that bind the Imperium for making considerable leaps forward in technology will still be in place. So, just like today, the only true form of advancement comes in the form of constructs created by recovered STCs from the Dark Age of technology, the vast majority of which being controlled, maintained, and studied by the Adeptus Mechanicus. With no more existential threats to face, the Martian priesthood will be able to dedicate more resources to their explorator fleets. Thus, the rate of STC recovery will advance exponentially, causing humanity to look more and more like the Dark Age of technology with every passing century. It is around this time that the Imperium would begin to resemble what we could consider a true Golden Age. Over time, it may even surpass the Dark Age of technology. But that's when the major cracks will begin to show, a prelude to the era of the machine. Although on paper, the priesthood of Mars is part of the Imperium, it's more accurate to think of them as an allied nation, considering the level of autonomy they are afforded and the amount of power they wield. The divide between these two factions will continue to grow deeper and more fractious with every new STC that the Mechanicus obtains. Sure, the Imperium will have numbers, but that doesn't really matter when the Mechanicus gains the ability to construct sun snuffers that are able to consume entire stars and mechnivores large enough to literally bite a planet in half. As the machine cult continues to grow in power and influence, the Red Planet will eventually surpass Terra as the new seat of humanity's power. Although Terra is a holy world, it is also a bloated carcass. Its population in the 41st millennium is said to be in the quadrillions, and it's estimated that some 80% of all of the resources generated across the Imperium's million worlds are brought back here to maintain this glorified monument to the weakness of flesh. This is something that will only get worse as the Imperium expands. Now eventually, the Mechanicus will view Terra as a liability, no longer worth maintaining. They will see it as a cancerous growth that needs to be excised for the good of mankind. To say such a decision would spark insane backlash and immediate retaliation is a big understatement. So I believe this is a plan that may take millennia to come to pass. When the attack comes, the Mechanicus will have agents in place across the cosmos to quell any resulting rebellions. It'll be swift and decisive, the opening salvo in the machine cult's war on flesh. Considering that they own all of the STCs, all of the Forge worlds, all of the technology, and all of the means of production, it is likely that there will be very few that could actually stand against them. At this point, many would likely support such actions. In the thousands of years they took to make their move, the machine cult would have been spreading propaganda and inducting larger and larger segments of the population into their teachings. Not only would Mars have become the most powerful planet in the galaxy, but it is also likely that at this point, the machine cult has surpassed the Imperial Creed as the dominant religion of mankind. After the Mechanicus has formally risen to power and has taken control of the Imperium in its entirety, its dogmatic teachings will continue to spread until all have been assimilated into the cult. All of our species will become further mechanically augmented, and after the last of the STCs is recovered, the Mechanicus will unlock the secrets of and make contact with the true machine god. It is at this point that humanity will begin to reach its apotheosis, where it will transcend flesh entirely and become fully mechanical. A galaxy-spanning supercomputer where every world and every individual person is another node in its vast interconnected network. The galaxy will grow cold and still, every planet dominated by towering servers and massive databanks. From the outside perspective, it will look as if the Milky Way is dead, but this couldn't be further from the truth. The galaxy is now a machine. If there is anything left of the human species, they will now exist as data ghosts echoing throughout the galaxy's servers. This is the ultimate fate of mankind, what will happen if they achieve victory. Or who knows, maybe the Emperor really will come back and he'll make everything better again and humanity will get its well-deserved happy ending. But what do you guys think of all this? Do you agree with any of my theories, or do you think I've totally missed the mark with this video? If your own personal theories differ from mine, what do you think would happen if each one of the factions was somehow able to achieve total victory? Again, don't take any of the theories I put forward in this video too seriously, none of them are canon. This was more of a thought experiment type video that I thought would be fun. It all stemmed from a late night hangout session with some buddies where, admittedly, a frankly irresponsible amount of alcohol was consumed. But I did try to back up some of my more wild tinfoil hat takes with the lore as it is currently written. In reality, we have no idea what would happen. Warhammer is a franchise where no faction can ever win, that's kind of the whole point. But anyways, leave all of your thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, and ideas for future videos down in the comment section below. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, it would mean a lot to me if you did. We're on the road to 1 million subscribers, so do your part in the long war and go ahead and touch that subscribe button. It's free and you'll feel a whole lot better after you do. Also, don't forget to check out Raid Shadow Legends using my link in the description. Anyways, big thanks to everyone who supports the work that I do, and I will catch you all in the next one.